We remain committed to the inquiry as it was first established. But let me be clear, a regulatory system that complies with the Leveson principles should be put in place rapidly. Let me stress, the status quo is not an option. Be in no doubt, we should be determined to see Lord Justice Leveson's principles implemented.
One of my tenants in Bristol, Joe Yates, was found murdered. I was taken into custody for 3 days. While I was in custody, all sorts of extraordinary allegations were made in the press about me, not merely that I was almost certainly the murderer, but I was somebody who was obsessed with death. It was a question of not in any way trying to find out the truth about the sort of person that I was, but simply attempting to impose on me the sort of caricature, the most monstrous individual imaginable who had been capable of committing this crime.
I responded to a journalist's request for case studies. She was looking for people who'd left the city to live in the countryside, and I seemed to fit the bill, and she asked me for my story. But the story that appeared in the Daily Mail, it was attributed to me, it was next to a big photograph of me, it was written in the first person, but I hadn't said 90% of it, it was made up. It was just absolutely horrific. I felt awful going out. I couldn't speak to people. I didn't know who'd read it, who hadn't read it, who thought I was this fantasist and liar.
The Daily Mail ran a front page headline which accused me of corruption and cronyism. Many people commented on it to me, and indeed I lost a major business project that very day. One of my clients said, "Andy, I'm very sure this isn't true, but we can't sustain doing business with you." The effect immediately afterwards was growing indignation, which became anger, and then ultimately an absolute determination to clear my name.
I was a serving police officer, as was my then husband. We were given an indication from colleagues that intelligence had been received, that we as a family were going to be targeted by suspects into quite a long-running murder to a private investigator, Daniel Morgan. A number of things happened to us. Our mail was tampered with. We'd had a credit card statement come through the post and it would be opened. Things were moved in the garden. We had vans following us to the nursery and school and dropping off the children. It came as a complete shock to us when we discovered that the occupants of one of the vans contained people who worked for News of the World.
After the initial shock and numbness and sense of unreality had worn off, I suppose it was anger that kept me going. The first words I think that I said to the solicitor, "Somebody has got to be sued." It's not something to be undertaken lightly to take out libel proceedings against large corporations.
It's really not easy to make a claim against a newspaper. The only reason that I was able to do it was because I was freelance, so there was a lot of caffeine being consumed over the 2 years that it took me to bring the case. I worked into the early hours most nights, 3, 4 in the morning. The whole thing was upsetting from start to finish. It made me physically ill. So then I got a phone call from their solicitor advising me that were I to go to trial and lose, it would be a real shame if they had to take my house off me. It was to try and get me to back down. It seemed to me that that's what they were trying to do.
The Daily Mail and their solicitors and barristers put me through 10 hours of reading and writing work per week for a 2-year period just to try and grind me down. It ruined my sleep patterns, it gave me eczema on my face, and not surprisingly, I became irritable and stressed.
You tend to think of newspapers as being part of quite big organisations. They have lots of money and, historically everyone feels that it is quite an uphill struggle.
Because we do not have the possibility of ordinary people taking action against newspaper corporations. Certainly what happened to me could just as easily happen to anybody else today.
What happened to me was one thing, but how it had to be resolved through the laborious process of English law is not something I would wish my worst enemy to have to endure.
It still does happen that people are being misrepresented, and for those people, there's nothing that they can do. Section 40, which would give victims of press abuse access to low-cost arbitration, that's on hold.
I know of other people who've been abused by the press who have decided not to take them on because they don't want to go through the hassle that I went through. One of the recommendations made by Leveson was that there should be a low-cost arbitration scheme in place. My case could have been resolved in a matter of weeks or months rather than 6 years.
It would provide the newspaper some protection as well, because this low-cost arbitration would weed out any vexatious claims. There are no downsides to it, and I don't understand why it isn't happening.
The fact is, the problem of closeness between politicians and media proprietors had been going on for years, and it's this government that's going to sort it out.
This government promised to deliver access to justice for everybody. It's made that promise in Parliament.
It's such a simple thing to do, and it would eradicate such a lot of stress and a lot of upset and a lot of torment.
I sat across a table from the Prime Minister with other victims of press intrusion when he promised that he would implement this new system.
Now we need the new Prime Minister, Theresa May, to act on those promises.
We cannot and will not accept any further delays.